Norway, the kingdom where Vikings once roamed the land and pirated Europe, is a Nordic country. It has the northernmost town inside the Arctic Circle, holds sovereign claims of the remote island of Svalbard and Jan Mayen, and even has claims to the Antarctic territories of Peter I Island and Queen Maud Land. Bordered by Sweden and Russia, Norway has a total area of 385,207 square kilometers. Thanks to the warm Gulf Stream, Norway has significantly milder weather than any other area in the world with such high latitudes. The weather can be one reason we have so many towns north of the Arctic line, while unbelievable Norwegian spirit is the other reason. As part of our research on global warming, our team booked on a Norway, Iceland, and Greenland tour. We will share with you the scenery, the stories on this trip. But first, we have to bring you in on Norway's interesting history. The earliest traces of human occupation happened when the ice melted after the last ice age. Stone tools found showed humans settled in this land as early as 11,500 years ago, while rock carvings were found in the southern part of Norway showed ancient Norwegians were not only good sailors and fishermen, they were also talented artists. Then about 5,000 years ago, new settlers started cordwood culture in eastern Norway. For the first time, Indo-European farmers grew grains and raised cows and sheep. Slowly but surely, the hunting fishing population of the coastal areas was replaced by farmers, except for the northernmost area where we visited. You see, it is impossible to farm in the permafrost. So hunting and fishing remained an important part of Norwegian lives, generation after generation. Then, 3,500 years ago, Norway stepped into the Bronze Age. What we noticed in the rock carvings left during the period is the carvings of ships made by sewn plank-built canoes in war, fishing, and trade. Norway then rolled into the Iron Age about 2,500 years ago. This is also the time when we found proof of contact between Norway and the then Roman-occupied modern-day France. And with contact with the outside world, started the next period. We can see outside influences from more sophisticated tools, house construction, and the forming of small states. Historians call this the migration period. Then about 1,400 years ago, the Viking period started. Viking seafarers colonized, raided, and traded in all parts of Europe. And they discovered Iceland in the 9th century. Even came across today's Newfoundland and Canada. So Columbus did not discover North America. The Norwegians did. In 872 AD, after the Battle of Harpsford, Harald Fairhair became the first king of a united Norway. Harald ruled with his iron fist, which made many Norwegians run for cover. They moved to Iceland, Faroe Islands, Greenland, and even Britain and Ireland. Even today's Dublin, Limerick, and Waterford were originally founded by Norwegian settlers. Olav Hakon, with the name Hakon the Good, became Norway's first Christian king. Then Olav Tryggvason set off raiding in England with 390 ships. He brought back not only seized properties from the south, but also the religion. The first church was built in Moster around the late 10th century. Norway was slowly turning into a Christian country. Like everywhere else in the world, money, power, and success bring about desires of wanting more. And people with power then want to fight each other. This is what happened in Norway around 1130, when the First Civil War broke out. It was a fight between brother princes because of unclear succession rules. The Bloody War ended in 1217, and new laws of succession were introduced. Major changes happened between 1000 to 1300 AD. The population grew from 150,000 to 400,000. While farmers during the Viking Age used to own their own land, now 70% of all land was owned by the king, church, or the aristocracy. Actually, during the 13th century, farmers had to pay about 20% of their earnings to authorities. That may be why Norwegians do not complain too much about high taxes today. They've been paying that for over 1,000 years. Ugh. The peace and increase in trade helped turn 14th century to Norway's golden age. But good lives were suddenly shadowed by Black Death. In just a year, Norway lost between 35% to 60% of its population. After losing so many farmers, the king lost a big chunk of his taxes. The nobles lost their wealth, and some even had to farm themselves. Then Hanseatic League took control over Norway's trade in the 14th century. And in 1380, Olaf Håkonsson inherited both Norwegian and Danish thrones. This is the Nordic merge of the crowns. When Kalmar Union was created in 1937, the three allianced Nordic countries waged war against the Germans under Queen Margaret I, who was Haakon's widow. The war was costly, and the smaller Norway suffered economic downturns when Norwegian goods could not sell due to the blockade and higher taxes. Norwegian people wanted to pull out of the Union, but the council was too weak to act on that. The Kalmar Union began to crumble in 1520 when Sweden declared independence, although Norway tried to get independence also. Norway's rebellion was defeated and it remained in the Union until 1814. People call this 434-year period a forced marriage, 400-year night, as Norway was an equal partner of this union only by name. All the kingdom's royal, intellectual, and administrative power was centered only in Denmark. But the 400-year night brought prosperity in terms of trading. In fact, Denmark supplied Norway with much-needed grain, while Norway supplied Denmark with timber, metal, and fish. In 1536, Norway lost its independence and became a colony of Denmark. Norway was restored as a kingdom in 1661, but lost large land areas after a few disastrous wars with Sweden. Then the 1695 famine killed about 10% of the Norwegians. But as many times before, the tough Norwegians got through and stood strong. In 1814, when Denmark-Norway was attacked by United Kingdom at the 1807 Battle of Copenhagen, Norway decided to ally with Napoleon. The losing war led to the Treaty of Kiel, which gave Norway to the King of Sweden. Norway actually took this opportunity to declare independence. It adopted a constitution like the Americans and the French, and elected the Crown Prince of Denmark and Norway, Christian Frederick, as Norway's king in 1814. This offended Sweden, and the Norwegian-Swedish War broke out. To avoid more bloodshed, Christian Frederick abdicated the Norwegian throne. On November 4, 1814, the Parliament elected Charles XIII of Sweden as King of Norway. Even when during the Swedish rule, Norway kept its liberal constitution and its own independent institutions, though it shared a common monarch and common foreign policy with Sweden. And in 1854, women won the right to inherit property. Women could even work, which was unheard of during that time. Then in 1898, all men were granted universal suffrage, followed by all women in 1913. From 1905 to 1907, the then Prime Minister Christian Michelsen helped separate Norway from Sweden peacefully. But in 1905, a national referendum confirmed people's choice of monarchy over a republic. But remember, we said during the 400 years of knights, there were no nobility, no intellectuals in Norway, so they can't find anyone with blood ties to the Kingdom of Norway. In European tradition, royal or blue blood is a precondition for laying claim to the throne, so they decided to offer the throne of Norway to Prince Karl of Denmark, a prince of the Dano-German royal house of Schleswig-Holstein, Sonderburg, Glücksburg, and a distant relative of several of Norway's medieval kings. The Danish prince took the name of Håkon VII, and then the Norwegian's royal house was re-established in 1905. Today, Norway is still a distant, cold place, but it is the one place you must visit if you want to experience midnight sun without being bundled up outside. Our trip started at Tromsø, the largest city in the north, and then cruised our way up. The stops including Harstad, Hammersfest, Alta, and at Honnesvåg, where we plan to visit the famous North Cap. Since the discovery of oil in 1970, Norway's GDP rank has been rising steadily. Today, Norway is the world's second wealthiest country in monetary value, with the largest capital reserve per capita of any nation. Unlike other so-called rich countries heavily in debt, Norway is a net external credit of debt. Norway maintained first place in the world in the UNDP Human Development Index, HDI, for 6 consecutive years, from 2001 to 2006, and then reclaimed this position in 2009. The standard of living in Norway is among the highest in the world. Our team found we could roam the city by public bus for $12 a day. Instead of paying $150 for a cruise tour, we took the bus. The Norwegian economy is an example of a mixed economy. A prosperous capitalist welfare state, it features a combination of free market activity and large state ownership in certain key sectors. Most Norwegians speak English. It was not hard to get directions on the street. And then we reached North Cap, the famous spot where we can see midnight sun like nowhere else in the world. To make sure we got there, we booked the expensive excursion, and it was an experience we can never forget. But how can we let go the opportunity to see midnight sun in North Cap? So we jumped on another bus at 10 p.m. and experienced the midnight sun few had seen in person. I am not an environmental expert, but I can tell you how clean and beautiful the land is. We passed by a stream and the guide said, "This person must be rich to be able to fish here." He said it cost a lady $30,000 to go to fish for 3 days. Well, I think that shows how hard and smart the government tried to protect the environment and the wildlife. During our team's tour, we saw the semi-house, the house the natives built for thousands of years. We saw the carvings near the coast by the museum, which is a World Heritage Site, and we were told how every reindeer belongs to a native person. If your car hits one, you better be ready to pay a fine up to $8,000. Ooh. Like everywhere else, the natives were suppressed for many years. Few countries would look back at their history and admit their mistakes. But the tour guide told us how the natives are allowed to fish and hunt reindeers because that was their way of life. And that's the least that we can do now to make up for what we took from them. I guess for travelers like us, Norway is a great place to visit. But for world citizens, Norway can be a model for freedom, democracy, and environmental protection. Someone may say, how can you call Norway a model for environmental protection? Don't you know oil drilling hurts the environment? Well, like I said, I am not an environmental expert, but I do know how hard it is to balance the need for economic growth and environmental protection. And from what I can see and what I have found, Norway seems to have done a good job. Norway is so beautiful. I almost want to move there. But when I think of the 4 months without the sun in the winter and the super windy days, I don't think I'm ready to call that home. But I must say, you should take a visit to see how life can be fun, beautiful, and amazing there. This is Ken Peters. Thank you for watching.